Welcome to this pastel pencil review and also a video for drawing a beautiful fighter fish as well. So I was just setting myself up to draw this fighter fish and I thought I might as well turn it into a review of the different pencils that I've got because I've now got quite a collection. So I've got some random pencils here and there. I've not got full collections of all of the brands. But that's for specific reasons, so I thought I might as well share it with you, how I go about buying my pastel pencils, choosing which ones to use, and which ones I'm favouring at the moment as well. So for this review, we're going to be looking at a lot of bright colours. So we've got these beautiful reds, some great blues, we've also got some of these yellows and oranges as well. And they are all colours which are appearing in the fish that you're going to see me draw, apart from so much the reds. But these reds have been bought specifically for an in-depth online class that we're doing of another fighter fish. So I have already sharpened some of these up, but that's where we're going to begin because it's quite an important point. So if I just bring them round so you can see them, we've got a variety. These are the Caran D'Ache, which I've only just started using some of these because they are quite pricey, but they are absolutely beautiful. We've also got some of the Stabilo Carbothello, and then we have scattered around some of the Derwent pastel pencils, which I've had for a few years now. And we've also got my favourite at the moment, the Faber Castel, but we'll come on to why I've got so many of those. It's not a straightforward reason. And we have some of the Cretacolors, and lastly, I'd forgotten about this one, but I have a Conte pencil as well. So there's quite a few to have a look at. They're all different from each other. They've all got pros, but they've all got cons as well. So let's get into it. The sharpening of the pencils. So as I said, I've already done most of this beforehand, but I will show you one of the frustrations with specifically the Derwent and the Cretacolor. This pencil I've been trying to get sharp and it's just not possible. So they sharpen quite well in terms of the wood. The wood comes off fairly easily. This craft knife is quite new, so it's still really quite sharp. However, the problem is the pastel itself is very brittle. It seems to have quite a lot of filler in it and not quite enough of the gum arabic, which is the binder. So because it's got, in my opinion, a fair amount of filler, which is chalk, they're very soft pencils, but then coupled with the lack of binder, they're not that buttery. Instead, they're quite brittle. I mean, pastel is brittle anyway, but these break very easily. Now, I'm amazed I have got that out. I just spent a few minutes sharpening and a little bit, I mean, you can see all of these little bits here just kept falling out, which means that the pencil's actually broken inside, which is another problem with pastel pencils in general. But then if, like the Derwent, they are particularly brittle, once you've dropped them, it's basically game over. So I've managed to get that out, but they're not very easy to sharpen, which is definitely a downside. We've also got the Cretacolor pencils. Now, the Cretacolor pencils sharpen up differently in terms of the wood around them. I've just got one here that's broken actually. The wood is much denser than the Derwent. You can see I'm having to put more pressure through this. And because of that, it means that they can be, again, a little bit tricky to get sharp without breaking your pastel because you have to put more force through, and the pastel, again, on the Cretacolors, is susceptible to breaking fairly easily. They are actually quite a hard pastel in many ways, but they're very brittle. So I used to think of them as soft, but that's the wrong way to think of them. They're brittle instead. So you can see here I'm struggling to get this bit of wood off because it's quite dense. But I know there's a really wonderful pastel in there. The other thing to note as well is that the Cretacolors, see that's broken. The Cretacolors pastel, if I just pull that out, it's fairly small. If you look at the radius of that, that is fairly slim, which is another reason why it breaks quite easily. That said, they have some really great colours, and there's actually three in particular that I use quite a lot, and they crop up in tutorials all the time, so I do still use them, but they can be a bit tricky to sharpen, as I've just shown. Now, let's take another broken pencil. I do usually take care of my pastels better than this. So this is a Faber Castel. I tend to find the Faber Castel sharpen quite well. The wood comes off quite a pleasing manner. It comes off in chunks, which is great. You can see I've actually gone into the pastel a bit, but the pastel and the Faber Castel is a bit more stable than the previous two brands. It's not a rock hard pencil though. You can see it's got a thicker piece of pastel in than the Faber Castel, but it's around about the same, a little bit thicker actually than the Derwent. But it does hold together a bit better. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that they don't break. You can see this bit had actually broken off. They do break, but I do find them a bit more stable and much easier in general to sharpen, especially when I'm doing fine work and I want to get them to a really fine point. I really enjoy using the Faber Castel for that. So you can see here, for example, that's fairly sharp. And they hold their point quite well. They don't hold their point quite so long as the harder pencils like the Cretacolor. Once they're sharp, they will hold their point quite a lot longer. Okay, moving on again, we have got the Stabilo Carbothello. Now this is already mostly sharpened, well sharpened. They do peel back very easily. I find the wood on these probably the easiest to sharpen out of all of them actually. They've got a nice slim pencil. I quite like that. It's quite comfortable for me to hold. Obviously people with bigger hands, probably more comfortable to have a larger pencil. But the radius of their pastel is probably consistent with the Faber Castel. It's fairly thick. They are a soft pencil, like the Derwent. However, they're more stable than the Derwent, much more stable. So they probably don't have quite so much filler in it, probably a bit more binder. And they have, as we'll see later, they've got, in my opinion, they've got more pigment. I think the colour's better in them. That said, they're still not a super buttery pencil, but they're definitely not as chalky as the Derwent. So 2 more brands left. We have the long forgotten Conte pencil. I did have one of these in a grey that I used up and then for some reason never replaced. That was years ago. So this doesn't need any more taking off. But if I just show you, they sharpen quite easily and you can see the pastel in them is very thick as well. So they are fairly stable until of course you drop it and it's broken inside, but they're quite a thick pencil as well. So if you really enjoy that, then the Conte is quite a nice one to hold. And lastly, we have my new obsession, the Caran D'Ache. Now, I'd never intended to try these simply because of the expense of them. I thought, don't fix what's not broken. These are about twice the price of my normal pencil. However, somebody gave me a little trial set, which was dangerous. And as soon as I tried it, I thought, oh my goodness, these are wonderful. And went and treated myself to a few. So they sharpen fairly well. They're probably similar to the Stabilo, somewhere between the Stabilo and the Faber Castel in the way that they sharpen, so it's quite easy. They've got a nice thick piece of pastel in there. So again, they seem fairly stable, but I haven't used them that much yet. So I can't really tell you how stable they are. But they are, of course, a very high quality pencil. And as we'll see later, the pigment in them is amazing. But they're a very soft pencil in the way that they are buttery. So they're not soft and brittle like the Derwent and, well, the Cretacolor, as I said, they're not actually soft, they're just brittle. These are more like the Stabilo, but probably nicer. Okay, so that is a little run through of, not what I intended to do, but a little run through of sharpening the pencils with the craft knives. I'm not going to go through sanding them as well, but it gives you an idea of how they sharpen up. So let's get on to actually using the pencil. So I've got 2 pieces of scrap here. These are both the Claire Spontane pastel mats. I've got another video on that, but this is what I use all the time. So this is the board. You can see it's very thick. It does bend, but has a bit of rigidity to it. This is their paper, which is almost like it's printed on a piece of card really, but quite bendy, and you've got less of a tooth. But more on that in the other video if you're interested in good pastel papers to use. So let's start with some of the blues. I'm just going to pull some of them out. Now, blue as a colour in pastel is quite problematic, I've found. I find the blue pigments in the pencils to be very unstable, unfortunately. This leads to a lot of breakages in the blues. It's also quite difficult to find a good blue with the qualities that you want. So, for example, in the Faber Castel, And I have a video on why I use Faber-Castell the most, but I've got a full set of these plus lots and lots of spares. So I've got hundreds of these knocking around, not specifically the blue, but the pencils in general. However, I am really underwhelmed by their selection of light blues. They've got wonderful turquoises. You can see some of them on here. They're great, but their light blues, they're quite underwhelming. So this is the 140. I think it's that ultramarine light. So I'll just pop little swatches of them down. So there's a nice colour to it. It's fairly opaque. It's got quite a lot of white mixed in, which means it doesn't have a really electric, bright presence on the page, but then depending on what you're using it for, that might be quite good. I prefer to tone down my saturated colours though with white, as opposed to not having that option. If I wanted this to be an electric colour, there is a specific process that I have to go through to get it much brighter, which I go through in a Kingfisher tutorial, and it's a bit of a faff. They're also, as I said, they're a bit brittle. The Faber-Castell isn't too bad on that front, but they do break. The next pencil I was introduced to was this Cretacolor, and I'm afraid I can't remember the worded name, but it's 47158. That would bring it up for you. I think it's sky blue off the top of my head. And this is a nice bright blue. So you can see how much more electric this blue is on the page. So that's great for things like Kingfishers. The problem is, and you can see from the pencil, it's very, very brittle. I often have a problem getting this sharp and can never usually get to the point where I'm able to sand it to a point, and I just have to kind of use it on the edge for small areas. So that is a bit of a problem with this pencil. That said, the colour is amazing. So I still have them knocking around. I've got another one here. Actually, yes, sorry. Light blue, not sky blue. That's 5-8, just check that's a 7. Same, yeah, so it's the light blue, but again you can see it's broken. So the blue, as I said, it is really quite brittle. This is the Delft blue from Cretacolor, so it won't show up very much on this because tonally it's very similar, but it just gives you another one to have a look at. This is much more milky, but it's a lovely blue for things like bluebells, and there is one that's similar, I believe, in the Derwents as well, but this one sharpens up better, you can see. So whether it's to do with the lightness of the blue pigment that causes them to be brittle, I'm not sure, but I do manage to get that one sharp quite a bit, and as I say, that's quite good for flowers. So we can just compare that to the Faber-Castell 143. Again, it just leaves me lacking somewhat. It's not quite a blue that I would use for very much. That said, I'm looking at the fish and I'm thinking it might be right for the fish. But that's kind of your options for a light blue in Faber-Castell. It's very limited. So that's why I've got so many blues from different brands, because I'm constantly on the lookout for a better one. So then I turned, when I was doing bluebells, I turned to the Derwents. Now, as I've said, these are very brittle, and that immediately put me off. But Derwents do have quite a good range of colours. Now you can see this is fairly similar to our 143 here. It's quite soft. That said, I've managed to get quite a bit of the pastel out. I haven't tried sanding it, but I have managed to get a lot of the pastel available. Filling in the tooth of the card quite nicely, as are the other brands. And if we just try their other one, which is the cerulean blue, they do have other blues, as do most of the brands. So again, this is very soft. It's filling in the tooth of the card. It wouldn't be good for things like details. It would not hold its point enough, and that goes for all of the Derwent pastel pencils that I've tried, but they are very good for things like flowers, where you've got very smooth transitions, or for your underpaintings, and they do tend to have a very wide range of colours. So that's why I've always got a few Derwent pencils knocking around. I'm not a big fan of the way that the pastel behaves, but they do have a really great palette to choose from. So just pop those back. Again, they're quite a wide pencil as well, so if you enjoy that, that's something to think about. So the last two that we've got, and I'm afraid I've only got one colour from each brand, we've got the Stabilo Carbothello and we've got the beautiful Caran D'Ache. So the Stabilo Carbothello. I believe I bought this last minute for a workshop. I wasn't able to get hold of a bright blue in the Cretacolor, and I was panicking a bit. And I got these, and it was a complete unknown, and they were fab. They were really great. I found this to be, apart from, as I say, the Caran D'Ache, which I haven't got that much experience with, I found these to be the most stable light blue for a pastel pencil. And you can see the colour is really good. It's really good. So this is the Cretacolor one here. This is the one that breaks all the time. That has got a higher saturation. It's much more intense in its blue, or a bit more intense, sorry. This Stabilo has got more white mixed in, so it does lose a little bit of its, electric vibrance on the page. However, compared to the other options, you can see it's still really vibrant. And if you think about that, set next to some dark blues and dark turquoises on the Kingfisher, it's going to be contrasted a lot. So this will appear almost as vibrant as that Cretacolor pencil. And as I said, I found it to be the most stable blue. So especially when I'm doing things like workshops, I don't want to be going around, my 6th or 8th students constantly sharpening up pencils. We won't get anywhere. So this was a real game changer for me. And I think if you're looking for a bright blue, I would go to this Stabilo Carbothello. It is a really great option. Now, having said that, this arrived in the post yesterday. So this has been specifically bought for the fish that I'm doing at the minute, because I wanted to give it a go. So you can see it's a much fatter piece of pastel. It's got a really wonderful texture to it. The only way I can describe it is soft and buttery. The others are soft, but they feel much more chalky. This has just got a really nice nature to it, to be honest. It feels great under the hand. So if we were to compare the colours, this again, it's very bright and luminous on the page. However, it's got more white mixed in yet again. So the more white you mix into any colour, the less colour you get. So this is lighter in tone, but less intense in its saturation. This, again, it would work really well for things like Kingfishers, because it's got that electric bounce in it, but it isn't as intense as the Cretacolor or the Stabilo. So I'd still say if you want a solid bright blue pencil, probably the Stabilo is going to be the better option. This is the 440 from Stabilo Carbothello. So let's just pop those back. So it gives you a bit of an idea of how the different pencils behave. And we're just going to go through a couple more, and then you can watch me actually use them in the fish, which is, of course, why you're here. So Faber Castel again, let's start here. I'm using a selection from their 1/8, 4, 5 and 3s. Now they do have other yellows, and they've got some yellows that are more unrealistic. These are a bit muted, but I use them quite a lot. So if I just start with them, they're quite a lot harder than the Carbothello or the Caran D'Ache, and they hold their point fairly well if you're looking to do details with them. So I do often use them for things like dogs, and I'm doing a series on African wildlife at the moment, which is going up on Gumroad. So we've got a tiger and a leopard so far, and these have been used in that over the top of more muted colours, and they do hold their shape very well. So if you're looking to do mammalian detail, you will want Faber Castel, in my opinion. They're quite versatile. I can do an underpainting with them, but I can also do the details on top. The main limitation of the Faber Castel pencil, and the reason I have a multitude of others, is the palette. So they do have quite a good selection of colours, but it's not wide enough. So I really like to delve into the other options to get especially the particularly punchy colours. You just don't get those in Faber Castel in a wide enough range. They have some wonderful turquoises though, and I really enjoy using those. Okay, so you can see they've filled in the tooth of the card fairly well, not so well on the blue card where we can see the blue coming through. I could obviously go over and put some more layers on. What I tend to find with the Faber Castel is if you do that too much and press really hard, go over it a few times, yeah, you start to ruin the tooth of the card. And don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but it actually starts going back to being this dark blue and you've crumpled the tooth of the card. So what I usually do with the Faber Castel is lighter layers. And then you have to leave it. So not entirely filled in if it's on a darker colour, but then this is a very light colour of pencil. Let's see how the others behave. So we've got the Derwents. This is their deep cadmium. So the colour from this Derwent is pretty amazing. It definitely blows the 184 out of the water there. And if we pop some on the blue. So that's showing up, I'd say, a little bit better than the Faber Castel. It is softer. And this is their Marigold. So again, on the sand colour, that's showing up really nicely, very vibrant. And on the blue, it's still got a fairly good coverage. I'd say it is covering the blue a little bit better than the Faber Castel, which you would expect because this is a softer pencil. If I just take my finger, I don't do a lot of blending with the pencils. But that helps you to see as well just how much softer the Derwents are compared to the Faber Castel. They do blend out a little bit better. So we've got the one random Conte pencil. Now this is a fairly hard pencil. I found the grey that I used to have from them really good for doing details. It showed up nice and easily. I seem to remember it sharpened quite well. I'd almost describe it as a dry pencil. So there's a lot of dry chalk coming off, whereas things like the Stabilo and the Caran D'Ache are more buttery. So I can't really comment too much on the collection of colours that they've got, I'm afraid, but it's just one I had and I thought I might as well show you. It does handle fairly well. I'd say it's somewhere between a Derwent and a Faber Castel. It's sort of in that ballpark. And as I said before, it's got quite a chunky grip on it, and it's got a lot of pastel in there, which would probably make it quite good for doing underpaintings because it would go fairly far. I tend to do underpaintings using the side of the pencil, and if you think you've got a lot of pastel in there, so you probably get a really good coverage from a Conte pencil. But they are a little bit dry, chalky. That does mean that they blend out quite well, more like the traditional Conte blocks, if you're used to those. They do feel more like that, but they're obviously a bit softer than those particularly hard blocks. So fairly good blending. Let's see how it covers the dark blue. A little bit more weak. So it probably wants a bit more pigment in there, so that it gets into the grooves a little bit more and doesn't let quite so much of the card come through. But it is good for a few details. I wouldn't be surprised if the white from this range would be good for doing whiskers, actually. Probably show up quite well. Okay, so a yellow I use a lot, and you'll know this if you follow my tutorials, is the Ochre Light from Cretacolor. Now this is quite a hard brittle pencil. It's really good for doing fur work in animals because, as you can see, compared to these other yellows that I've got out, this has got a lot of white mixed in. Because of that, it's fairly desaturated and it's much more natural looking. Specifically, the Faber Castel, they just don't have a pencil like this. Their closest one would be the 102, which is their lemon. Or is it the cream? I can never remember. But you can see it's quite cold and still quite yellow. When you use that in high quantities in your fur work, I find the actual fur starts to feel a bit yellow and almost a bit neon. So I don't use it very much, and the Cretacolor Ochre Light is much better as a replacement. It's a bit warmer and a bit more natural. So it's quite good for doing details with. It holds its point for quite a long time. The main problem with the Cretacolor, again, is the sharpening of them. You've really got to look after your Cretacolor pencils. As soon as you drop them on the floor, it's probably game over. So I'm afraid I haven't got a yellow from the Caran D'Ache. I only treated myself to a couple for this next drawing. I have got this sort of peachy coloured pencil. So this is the 042. And I'm expecting, well, I have used this one before. It behaves very similar to that blue. So again, I would say buttery in its consistency. See how it manages with, you can see how that covers the tooth of the card, no problem on there. So compared to the other brands that we have trialled, that has really covered the tooth of the card. The other brands have struggled much more. You can use the Caran D'Ache for details, but because you can see here I'm using it for details, it is soft. So really it's much better suited for either flat objects such as a flower where you're blending colours together, or your underpainting and your mid-tone layer where you're bringing things together. I think for those really fine details on top, you probably want a harder pencil unless you're working on a very large scale. If you're working on a really large scale, then you don't need the details to be quite so fine, but you would spend a lot of time resharpening that, trying to find a sharp edge, because I think that would blunt fairly quickly. Now I don't have a yellow from the Stabilo Carbothello, but I do have their ivory, which is quite similar to the 102. And I use this ivory quite a lot because it's fairly soft but quite well pigmented. It shows up if my underpainting has become a little bit too thick, or if I need a very dark underpainting but bright details on top. This shows up fairly well, but you have to be careful not to go over it too often. Go over it too often and it will start to blend together. So you can see that has covered the tooth of the paper really quite well, even on the blue, almost as well as the Caran D'Ache actually. And as I say, you can use it for details, but it will blunt. So much like the Caran D'Ache, it's not great for using for details all over. I would mix it with other brands, otherwise you're going to lose the underpainting detail and just end up with a mushy soup on top. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an idea of the different brands that I like to use. As I said, Faber Castel, they're my number one because they're the most versatile really. It doesn't mean they're the best, it just means they're the best in most categories, and I don't need to have a full set of every single brand that I enjoy using. So it keeps costs down and it also makes it a little bit easier when I come to replenishing my pencils. I haven't got to go all over to get my different stocks together. Then I have a few from the Cretacolor that I use very often, but as I say, they're quite hard, so I don't have that many of them because they break a lot. It's more the colours that they offer. Derwents I tend not to delve into. They are used more as a last resort if I really can't find a colour that I need. Then I will buy a few Derwents, but generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of them because they break too easily, and they're only particularly good for underpaintings because they're a very soft pencil. The Conte, I don't really know why I haven't used more of these, to be honest. They are better than the Derwents. It might be due to the range of colours. You'll have to go and have a look yourself. But they don't handle in quite so much of a buttery way as the Faber Castel. As I said, they're somewhere between the Derwent and the Faber Castel. The Stabilo Carbothello, very good for bright colours, and I've got a turquoise here as well that I also use for a kingfisher. They seem fairly stable and it's definitely the best bright blue that I've found. And the new Caran D'Ache, or new to me, I've got to say, I really enjoy using the ones that I've used so far, but they are very expensive and they are not going to be so good for lots of fine details, especially if you are working on a smaller scale. If you're working on a really large scale, then your details won't need to be quite so fine, so you can probably get away with using more of the Stabilo and the Caran D'Ache for those top details. Okay, enough blabbering, let's get on with the fish. So the fish is going to mainly be a time lapse. I'll probably interrupt here and there because, as you can tell, I do like to talk. But it's to give you a little bit of an idea of how I like to use my pencils, and I will be doing a fighter fish as an online tutorial on my Gumroad very soon. Okay, so I just sketched it out, and I've sketched it freehand because this obviously isn't for a class. It doesn't need to be perfect, which is quite nice. So my fish has a slightly different pose to the photo I'm copying, and the flow of the tail is a bit different as well, but I'm using the photo a lot for getting the tones and the colours that I want to get in there correct. So the rest of it really is me filling her in, and it's probably a him, and working out the colours as I go. So as I say, this is kind of like a preparatory drawing for a full-length tutorial that's coming to Gumroad. And in case I haven't already said, I'm not sponsored by any of the materials in this video at all. This is simply what I like to use, and some new ones I'm discovering to the dismay of my bank account. So I hope you enjoy this, and do comment down below if you'd like to see something else done in this manner, or if you've got any questions. I'd like to hear from you. So let's crack on. I'm going to start with the eye. I always start with the eye when I can. So if we come back to our piece of sand board here, the pencil I'm using at the minute to start to build up that really amazing iridescence on his scales is this one here, which if you put it on the sand, look how dark it appears. So that green there is the same as that green there. And the colour underneath it, which appears to be light and golden, is this one here. And on the sand coloured board, look how dark it comes out. It's absolutely amazing when you change the colour of board that you're working on. You get a totally new palette of pencils. It can be very frustrating because you're looking for a pencil that you know will give you a certain effect on a different coloured board, and it looks completely wrong on the coloured paper that you've picked, but it can equally give you some astounding effects. And the reason that I picked the dark coloured board for this is because it's going to make the tail really bright, and it's going to make all the iridescence actually shine out. So a really wonderful little trick there, just picking the colour of your pastel paper. If you want to know more about that, I have got a video on pastel mat and your colours. So let's get back to the drawing now, which I've got to say, it's really good fun. It's a great project. So you can see as I'm working, just slow it down, the video down so you can have a little look. Although I'm working from a very detailed photograph, you can see absolutely everything, certainly in the lit areas, very easily. I don't go and add in every single detail that I can see in the photograph. For me, it's just not my style. As much as my drawings often end up looking very realistic, and some people do say, oh, these look like photographs. If you have a proper look, you can really still see the pencil marks, which I really enjoy, and you can see how the painting was put together. Obviously, if you want to go for that hyper-realistic effect, you just have to take these layers a bit further, and you have to tighten up your pencil work. But I've actually spent a few years loosening up my pencil work so that I can get more of a painterly finish if you actually study the drawing, and you can see much more what goes on inside this pastel painting. So it's all about an illusion of detail for me that I find particularly interesting. And a lot of that comes down to your edge work, and making sure that you haven't got too many really sharp edges everywhere, and that you're using the soft edges to your advantage so that you can have an area of sparkling light or on this fish iridescence, and it will appear to convey a multitude of details that you haven't actually put in. You've always got to remember when you're working on a piece that is quite detailed that you don't appreciate a piece of work from 30 centimetres away, as you do when you're drawing. Once it's on the wall, you're likely to be looking at it from at least a couple of metres away, and therefore the effects that you need to build up are actually a little bit different. And if you start to build up every single mark that you can see in the photograph, especially if you're working on a fairly small scale, you can actually end up with a flat drawing. You can just get so distracted and build miniature drawings inside your subject that actually the lighting isn't consistent across your finished piece. So that is definitely something to watch out for, and the way to get around that is the old artist trick of walking away from your painting or your drawing a few meters, and also giving your eyes a little bit of a break. It really does make a difference. You hear people say it all the time if you watch a lot of videos like this, but it's very true, and it does take your drawings a little bit longer to complete, but then you will end up with a much better result. So you can see at the minute I'm adding quite a lot of soft light. I'm just going to show you the trick again. This is with what I would call a mid-grey, so it's about number 5 on the tonal scale, so it's showing up as a light grey, or certainly a soft grey on there, but if we put it on this board it's dark again. So it's absolutely incredible how changing the board will alter your drawing, but you do have to be careful as well, not to just rush in with pencils that you think are correct if you're not used to drawing on that tone of pastel mat. And with a dark coloured pastel mat like this, dark tone, you also don't need to press quite so hard. You press hard, you're really going to struggle to get the other layers to sit on top of what you're working on without it all simply melting together. So I'm going to carry on adding my scales in. I say scales like that because I am not following the perfect pattern. I'm building up a texture on my drawing instead, because I want the focal point to be the fins ultimately. The fish itself is very beautiful, but the fins are even more magnificent. So we'll save most of the detail work for further down in the painting. Okay, so the glitter has really started to pile on now, and on the photograph I've got some incredible blues to begin adding in as well, which I'm so excited to put in. These are just going to be magical on the page. The only drawback is that for the type of blue that's on the fins at least, I don't think I'm going to be able to use my new Caran D'Ache. I think I actually need to try the Delft blue from Cretacolor, so I'm going to see how this shows up. So is this going to be bright enough, or is the pencil going to be too hard to cleanly show up on top of these layers? See, that's always the test, is with the harder pencils, when you don't need lots of just fine details, you have to put a fair amount of pressure through the pencil, and what can end up happening is it just begins to mix with the layers underneath and the colour's not as clean. So you can see that the pencil that you need to pick depends not just upon the colour you need, or the technique you need to use. It also depends what it's sitting on top of as well. It can really affect your pencil choice. So this isn't showing up quite as clean as I would like it to. It's still starting to sparkle out nonetheless. So I'm going to add a layer with this because it is about the colour that I want, and then I'm going to go in with some other blues as well and increase the sparkle on this really amazing fish. And I can't believe that this is the boring part of the fish as well. The tail is just incredible. So because this is quite a sort of very soft pencil, it's sitting on top of the other layers more easily and not mixing in quite so much. It's not quite the right colour, but actually I think it's better in tone. Tonally, this is very similar to a lot of the underpainting, but the colour obviously is very different being blue. So we get a really great bouncing effect when you get the same tone but a different colour right next to each other, as we have here. So I'm still going to add a bit more glitter, but starting to use the two blues in unison is definitely building up a closer effect. So unsurprisingly, I'm now going to take out the Caran D'Ache. There's some very bright blue just on the lower jaw here. So I'm going to be very careful with this pencil because it is such a beautiful, bright and soft pencil. I think I could very easily overdo my work, and I've got to try and remember that the focal point is down here, and his fin here has got some very bright blue. It's brighter than the blue that we can see on his face. So it's probably going to be best if I put my pencil down in a moment and move on to the next brightest, well actually the brighter area, which is this fin here. Okay, so that is the body done. Well, pretty much. There's little bits of it that you can see poking through, but that is the body pretty much done. I'm really happy with how that's come out. It was so good fun to do. I can't tell you, that was just great to get to use lots of those different colours and use them in an unusual way because I'm working on this dark pastel matte board. So it's now onto the fins, which really are the main star of this piece, although having finished the face, I could almost do without the fins. I think he looks great as he is. Makes me just want to go and draw a bowl of goldfish. So there's a lot of shadow work to do underneath, which is another lighting technique that can be really great to get away with doing less detail in some areas, hyping up the detail in other areas, and actually getting a drawing to sit better than if you put detail everywhere, but also finishing it much more quickly as well. So I quite like to use this effect when I'm working on a dark pastel matte board. It does turn out really, really nice. I've been studying the colours in the fish tail, and for this I think I'm actually going to use quite a bit of Derwent. As I said, it's a soft pencil, but being that the fins are of course flowing, that they're almost like silk in water. It's absolutely mesmerising. The Derwent will actually work quite well here because I don't need to get fine details, but it does look like it's about the right colour. and the colour I'm needing is blue, which, as I've said before, can be a bit tricky to get from all of the brands. So I'll see how I go, but probably going to see a little bit of Derwent appearing in here. So I'm going to start off with the shadow underneath and try and figure this area out. On the photo, it's certainly a little bit difficult to see what's what, and I do often say to my students, if you can't see it, don't put it in, which means for areas like this where it's tricky to work out, oh, is that this part of the fin or is that its tail? If you can't tell, don't try and put it in perfect detail, because it'll actually come back to bite you. So you're better off simplifying things if you can't quite see all of the details that you want to. So when I say simplify, in this case, because there's a lot of shadow, I'm actually being fairly liberal with the black and covering up a fair amount of this fish. So this fin will be continued, but it just needs the other work putting in underneath it first. Some lovely passages in this where the shadows join different features together and you just get this really beautiful flow through your drawing. It's a really nice reference photo. So that's the first part of the tail done. Actually, I think it's a fin, sorry, from underneath. But anyway, I won't try and get into the details because I haven't looked at which bits are which. The difficulty definitely with doing this on the dark pastel mat board is that other than a dark grey and a black, the rest of the pencils show up a little bit too bright most of the time. So that really does leave you with only one option, which is to desaturate your colours with the black and the grey. That said, it's partly that effect which gives you the dramatic lighting. So it's a little bit swings and roundabouts whenever you gain something in pastel, as you know, putting down these colours and they show up exuberantly bright, you will lose something in return for that, which is why I'm often found to be working on a mid-tone board, such as the light blue and the sand. They're my preferred. I've always got a little bit of that hanging around. It's what I used to use for pet portraits and such. It's a very versatile. They're very versatile colours and tones. So that first fin is in. That is, believe it or not, that's the darkest fin. And I think I've taken it a little bit too bright in areas, but I'm going to see if I can get away with it because the blues in there are just stunning. And I'd really like to retain some of that. I'm going to play around with some of the colours and the tones in the main part of the tail, which is this shape here. There's quite a lot of very fiery oranges and yellows, and I'm going to mix in some pink as well. And that is the area where we've got the brightest blue. On my photo, it's overexposed, which obviously means that we get more in the face, and it's clearly been heightened in colour as well. But I'm going to deal with some of that overexposure and not add in as much white as I can see in the photo, because I think actually it would be a bit of a shame for the drawing. So cracking on, I've got some, again, very fiery colours to be putting in this fin down, or part of the tail down here. I also need to finish off these two fins over here, which have rather been forgotten. So I think I will do that first. So here I'm just using a very small amount of the Caran D'Ache. This is the Scarlet pencil, and I have to say it really is amazing in terms of I'm not putting any pressure through it, and look how bright the pencil shows up. I mean, it is quite incredible really. They are very expensive, but they handle in quite a different way to things like the Faber Castel, this is Faber Castel right now. I think it's one of those things where if I had the opportunity to spend as much as I wanted on materials that I might not use very often, because there are a lot of colours that I wouldn't use that often from the Caran D'Ache, then yes, a full set would be lovely. But you definitely do need some of the harder pencils for the details. And of course, I don't know what the full remit of colours are like from Caran D'Ache either. They could all be a bit too over bright as well. I think the Faber Castel there do quite well with the muted tones that they offer. They do work very well for wildlife. And I do quite usually a lot of British wildlife, which tends to be duller in colour. So you do need a good selection of browns, for example, and potentially not so many of the bright, fiery reds and oranges, as fun as they are. So I've been using mainly Faber Castel for the base of this fish. I've used various things, but a lot of Faber Castel, especially for the dark greys and the blacks. I've been using the Faber Castel pretty much exclusively for those. Okay, so at the minute I'm rendering this tail here, and it's actually coming out a bit more saturated than in the photo. Again, because to get it dark enough, I've got to use more of this dark grey or even the black to get it dark at the top. And I don't want to lose too much of this orange and red colour in here. I think that'd be a bit sad, really. So there are some more dark lines that need to go in. But in terms of getting it tonally darker, I'm going to see whether I can balance it up with the rest of the work instead of trying to take it darker and then getting rid of all this beautiful colour. Orange and yellow in particular, they're quite weak in terms of how dark you can take the pigment and still retain the colour, whereas colours like green and blue are fairly comfortable getting darker and still retaining their hue. So it does mean, of course, that we end up working with a lot of browns when we are taking oranges and yellows darker. But in this instance, the browns just aren't dark enough on this pastel matte board. If I was doing this on a different coloured board, it wouldn't be a problem. So I'm just starting to use some of these Caran D'Ache pencils, and as I said at the beginning, if you've watched the review for the pencils, I haven't got very many of these pencils at the moment. I say at the moment because they're so wonderful, I can see myself buying some more. But I basically just got myself a little trial set for 2 specific projects, this being one of them, and then I'm doing another fighter fish, but with reds instead. And I'm really looking forward to trying out the reds because so far they've been amazing. So I'm just working into the lightest areas now of the drawing, and the reference photo is overexposed and oversaturated. I mean, I'm taking the oversaturation into my own work because it is stunning, but the overexposure is something I am gently trying to work with and around. A lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is actually just bright white in the photo, but I didn't want to go bright white. So I start working with pinks. In this case, I've got a Caran D'Ache that is, and I'm afraid I don't know the name of this pencil. The other ones have it written on, but this is 042, if you want to know. So it's a bit more peachy. And if I didn't have the Caran D'Ache, I would probably be working with this one instead from Faber Castel, which is 132. It's darker and warmer. I love mixing pink into my oranges and my yellows. And if you want to find out more about that, I do have various tutorials on Gumroad that go into it in a bit more detail. I'm working with the Cretacolor, and as I said, I used to think this was a very soft pencil, but in fact what I meant was that it was brittle, not soft. And so it's just about the right colour and tone for some of the work that I want to do, because it's orange but mixed with a lot of white, so because of that it's quite desaturated. And it's the colour that I want, but the pencil doesn't behave quite how I need it to behave. So I'd quite like it to run over the top, for example, of some of this blue, but it's such a hard pencil, it's just not going to show up, because you have to press very hard to get it to show up, and that means that it starts mixing. The Caran D'Ache, however, although not the right tone and colour quite, it's very soft, so it's sitting on top of it a bit more easily. And if we just take the Faber Castel for argument's sake, this is also showing up, but again it's not showing up quite as cleanly as the Caran D'Ache, but it's really not bad. I do find these a very good all-arounder pencil. I'm taking a lot of artistic liberty with this, looking at the reference photo almost for inspiration more than anything else, and then coming back to my own work and sort of seeing what the work is telling me in terms of how bright certain areas might need to go, what the overall flow of the tail is starting to look and feel like. Do I need to go lighter, darker, less, more colour? Overall, of course, I'm oversaturating a lot of this. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of this drawing now. There's lots of little areas that I could spend more time fixing up, and I might well do a little bit more fixing up here and there. But I'm going to go in with the white. So as I said, on the photo there is actually a lot of white, but I'm choosing where to put it instead of putting it everywhere that it is on the reference photo, just so that I can be a bit more specific with where the light's coming from, and also give our drawing a little bit more diversity in terms of the amount of colours and tones we have in there, and change where the focality is as well. If everywhere is ridiculously white and bright, then it not only loses its potency, the white, but it also makes it a little bit confusing to look at an image, certainly as a drawing. You must remember that photography and art, they are different. So when you're translating photography into a drawing, you don't necessarily need all the information that is in front of you. So I'm going around with my new Caran D'Ache, which, yeah, if you've just jumped into the video, I haven't used this brand before, but it is really good for heading over the top of thick layers and still coming out bright, strong, still very white. So I'm really happy with it. I think from the other brands I've tried, I haven't used other whites that are quite as strong as this. Just wondering whether that nib's actually, I think the nib is actually broken in that, so that's rather annoying. So I'm just going to come a bit further up my drawing again. I always do this towards the end of a drawing because you'll find that what was balanced now doesn't look quite as it did before. And of course on this drawing when we've got so much going on underneath, there is so much light, the face ends up looking a little bit dull. Now in the photograph the face isn't that bright, but I do want it to shine out a touch more than it is doing, just so that the drawing is a little bit more balanced in that way. So I'm just adding a couple of dots here and there of some particularly saturated or bright pencils, and it will just pick these areas out a little bit more so that they can hold their own against what's happening underneath and still look quite interesting. Because remember, when the face went in with these scales, I mean, in person at least, it looked really quite effective, and I was absolutely delighted with it. So I don't want it to lose that potency on the page, if you like. The head and everything is still absolutely beautiful and definitely deserves its own limelight. So I'm just going to pick out a few scales a tiny bit brighter. Handy little trick, if you put something in and it's too bright, you can tap on it, don't smudge, you can tap on it, and it will just blend it into the layers underneath. There's a little bit more sparkle. That is tying the head in with the body much better. So again, this is where you need to be careful of a reference photo. They are, of course, very useful. But if you tie yourself to it, you can end up with a drawing that doesn't actually sit together properly. And you can spend as long as you want trying to fix it. But if you're trying to fix it by making it more and more like your reference, you probably won't get that far with it. Because sometimes you just need to use a bit of art theory and fix it from that standpoint instead. This is one of the Cretacolors that I've got. I've got just a random selection of Cretacolors, which I've amassed over the years, as and when I've needed a colour that I haven't got. But a lot of my pencils I buy online, so it's quite difficult to tell whether it's the colour I actually need. More often than not, I end up using it for a different project that I hadn't intended it for. It's definitely one of the drawbacks of buying online, but of course, when you do buy online, you can choose from any brand that you want, which is quite nice. Okay, so I think this is getting there. Just looking around again, are there any little areas that could do with a little bit more colour, brightness, but to be honest, I think it is about finished. So I am really happy with how this has come out. I've tested out some new pencils along the way. I've revisited some pencils such as the Derwents that I hadn't used in a very long time for various reasons. And you can see I've ended up with a drawing that's extremely bright and colourful, and is really showing off the fish in all of its glory. So there will actually be a proper lesson for this. I will go through step by step, not just the pencils I'm using, but why I'm using them. Because as I said, in terms of looking at a reference photo and taking the information that you need from it as opposed from all the information that's there. There's quite a few processes I use to get the information I need, such as colour theory, tone, composition, exposure, and the list goes on and on. But I take you through all of that with me as I'm drawing so that you not only learn how to draw a fish, but you learn how I've done it so that you can go and apply those lessons to other pieces of your own art. And that is the best way to learn. Learn what goes in behind a painting, not just that, oh, I've picked up the Stabilo Carbothello blue, I'm going to put it here and it looks great. That's not that helpful, and it just leaves you by the end of it thinking I've done an amazing drawing, but I couldn't necessarily have done that by myself or be able to do it again without the video, and I don't think that's particularly great tuition. So I have lots of different videos on Gumroad at the moment, and when the fish is recorded, it's actually going to come out as part of a collection of really brightly coloured animals and insects, which is going to be, I think, a really fab collection to work through. So you can find all of that linked below. I've got various other free lessons on YouTube, some theory, some how to draw different flowers. So go and have a dive into those. But I hope you feel thoroughly inspired, and I hope you have a better understanding of the different pastel pencils and what the different brands can offer you. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, or subscribe, and do comment below if you've got any suggestions for further videos. Thank you so much, and happy drawing.